The following episode was recorded at Banff Session 2026, which is celebrating 70 years of architects and interior designers coming together to share ideas, culture, strategy, and this year's theme was origin stories. In this episode, I'm joined by Ron Wickman. He runs his own Edmonton-based practice focused on accessibility and barrier-free design. Ron is a recipient of 18 City of Edmonton Mayor's Awards in Accessible Architecture. He holds a Bachelor of Environmental Design and a Master of Architecture from the Technical University of Nova Scotia. He's also the author of several books, most recently, Accessible Architecture Beyond the Ramp, which was published in 2020. I'm your host, Kelso Brennan, and I'm genuinely curious about strategy, business, architecture, design, and talking with the people behind big, bold ideas. Ron, thank you for coming and meeting in person. And I've enjoyed some of our very initial conversations over the phone, and I'm excited to have you on the podcast today.
Great, yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I'll just start by saying that you've got a tremendous reputation in the architecture industry, obviously with accessibility design. And I'm going to talk about something that came up in our phone call initially, which, of course, I feel like was such a serendipitous moment. So your father was a great inspiration to you as an architect, and maybe can you first elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. He was. He was injured in a work-related accident when I was only a few months old. So I grew up with a father who used a manual wheelchair, and in many ways, when I look back, I think he could have taken on any kind of job, I guess. In those days, though, in the 60s, basically he was told, your life's over. You know,
Yeah.
through the medical industry saying, like, you're probably going to be in an institution, your marriage, I don't know what that's going to look like, further your education, getting a job, all these things were like, no, none of this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And he was just the kind of person that was like, no, that's not going to work for me, right?
That's great.
And he did have an interesting upbringing. His childhood was not great. It was very, he was very poor. Left Thunder Bay with less than a grade 9 education. Ended up in Edmonton in the beginning as somebody who was homeless, and kind of worked his way up a little bit. Was just kind of drifting from job to job. And even after I was born, for that short time, he was still kind of a little bit aimless, drifting a bit, and then he got injured. And even the term paraplegic, he didn't know what it was, and nobody was really interested in telling him exactly what that meant.
Yeah.
And so he found out just by looking it up in the dictionary. And
Oh no. Yeah.
and just the thought, and again, in those days, just the unknown territory you're in, right? Like what does that mean exactly?
Especially the mental space too.
Exactly.
Yeah. That'd be very, very challenging.
So today, people get hurt, and it's much more encouraging, right? Like life will go on. You're going to have to go through rehab and all that, but we encourage you to do that. And not that you're not going to go through something mentally through all of this, but certainly today you would have much more hope that things would be fine, and you would just live a life a little bit differently, right? From a wheelchair.
Understood. Yeah.
So my dad had to overcome that mental obstacle as well, right? And he went back to NAIT and finished his high school. Then ended up in university, and here's where his story gets to a point where he's liking school, but he's really liking the student advocacy part. So maybe that was in him all the time, and he just sort of found this out. But he started becoming much more active in kind of the political realm at the university, and got into advocacy. So his trajectory could have been something different. It could have been just maybe getting a job or in like accounting or something like that.
Yeah.
And that advocacy wouldn't have been a part of his life, nor would it have been a part of mine.
Yeah.
So I would have always experienced the environment with him from the perspective of somebody in a wheelchair.
Yeah.
But the advocacy might not have been there, right?
Yeah.
So he became a very strong advocate, and because nobody else kind of really wanted to do it, he sort of became the leader of it as well.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And so everybody was looking to him like help us, and he's like kind of fumbling through, going, well, this is new territory. Nobody really there's no path that's been
That's
set
right.
before, and so he and others were part of that path. And for me as a young person, I remember on just off 82nd Ave, 83rd Ave in Old Strathcona, there was an old police station, and they were given they were called the Handicapped Housing Society of Alberta, and talk about super grassroots.
Yeah.
I was there as a 8-year-old kid licking envelopes and stuffing envelopes, for my dad, and helping all the others, right? And there were people around me. I'm surrounded by people with various disabilities, blind, deaf, and cerebral palsy, and so that was my world. That's what I grew up with.
Yeah. It's
And
been huge.
yeah, and then as I started to experience the environment with my dad, and then also meet other kids and their parents, I started to see the vast difference between how we had to plan our journeys
Right.
to get groceries or go to the movie theater, and
Yeah.
then worst of all, get on a plane and travel somewhere and be told the hotel was accessible when it really wasn't. And,
Oh, yeah. And then,
so all of that was like really triggering for me. And so, as early as 12, I said, I want to be an architect. And if I knew what the word thesis was, I could have written my thesis at 12.
on accessibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, this is why I'm going to be an architect, and this is exactly what I'm, going to do as an
Yeah.
architect.
Your book, Beyond the Ramp, and I read through quite a bit of it. Thank you for sending it in advance.
Yeah.
And I found it was such an inspiration. It sounded like your father played a huge part in your career, and also your guys' influence, both you as father, son, have shaped incredible amount of lives thereafter, how people move today. And my uncle Ed Brennan, knew your father quite well as well. And so when we connected on our first phone call, that
Yeah.
was sort of one of those things that was an aha moment.
Yeah.
And my uncle Ed was also an advocate for
Yes.
disabilities and
Very
ramps.
much so.
One of
Wow.
those stories that stood out to me, I was reading back on some old newspapers. So newspapers.com, there's a nice plug, not sponsored, but it has access to newspapers. And so I went all the way back into some archives, 1975, 1977. And there's an article about my uncle Ed getting a ticket. So a traffic ticket, a violation. And so he went to court to fight it, except he couldn't get into the courthouse and there was no ramp or accessibility. And he said he refused to be treated like a piece of luggage. But they did offer to lift him up in the chair, but he said, you prefer not to do this. But there's sort of a spark and an awakening at that time to say, no, it's got to be better than this. Like this isn't how it should be. And so they moved the court date and the courthouse to another location that was accessible. But you and I shared a couple of newspaper clippings of your father and
Yeah.
my uncle together, and really championing that. And I was going to ask if you knew Ed very much or had many interactions with him.
I did. He was around all the time, and he was one I do really remember. And like, as soon as you said he was your uncle, I just immediately thought, this was the guy that was like, he would pull all the stunts. Like,
Yeah.
my dad might have been the mastermind of some of these things, but Ed was the one that would always like.
What kind of some of the stunts do you remember?
Well, like the traffic ticket that you talked about. He was very athletic. I remember that, and so the idea, like, I know they did things like balancing on their back wheels, and they would do that at Southgate Shopping Mall.
Yeah.
And they balance for hours.
Hours,
right?
yeah, that's right.
And they create an obstacle course, and then people that would walk by, let's say, could get into a wheelchair and try to navigate the obstacle course.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
and that sort of
So
thing.
showing people what the
Yeah,
experience was
exactly
like.
what the
Oh,
experience
I
was
didn't know
like.
that. I
Yeah,
appreciate that. That's nice to
they
know.
did. It was really good. And often I think about that today, and I go, that is a good kind of lesson for people
It is, yeah.
to learn. But even better, I would say, is actually experiencing the world with somebody who has the disability. So actually being with somebody in a manual chair or a power wheelchair, or somebody who's like my experience today, And these last couple of days has been with my good friend Mark Yankow, who is blind. And for the last 2 days, I've been challenged a little bit more than I'm used to with actually helping, guide him around
Yeah.
the Hotel McDonald, which is not very accessible.
Or Banff Springs?
Banff Springs,
Banff
sorry.
Springs, yeah.
Yeah,
Same.
I'm back in Edmonton.
Yeah, Fairmont family, of course, but yes, the Banff Springs.
Yes, sorry, the Banff Springs
Yeah,
Hotel.
the tactile and the braille aspect
so,
of the
but
wayfinding.
there's stairs everywhere. There's but even having to call him in the morning and go get him from his room and help him get to the reception desk and check out and then get him here to the venue and just help him get to the washroom and all that. Like, these are things that I'm seeing, wow, this is like, what do you do when you go into a men's washroom and you're blind and you got to find the toilet stall and
Right.
you're feeling around and you're
Yeah.
probably like starting to touch other men, and that's
Yeah.
maybe not such a good
Or,
thing.
yeah, or the
whatever,
facilities in
There's
themselves.
all
and
that
you're like,
crazy.
well,
Yeah. So these are all of my experiences even today. So from early childhood to today this is my community of influencers, or people that I work with and are friends with,
Yeah.
that I spend time with. But I do want to just get back quickly to your uncle, Ed, because this might be, and I'd love to see if you could find it. I've never been able to find it, and I might be talking about a bit of an urban legend, but
Oh.
the one that always sticks out in my mind was that Ed hung himself from the high-level bridge in his wheelchair, so not from the neck,
Yeah.
but from his
Yeah,
wheelchair,
of course.
and he refused to get out or up until the media came to hear about this
Okay.
issue of accessibility.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that actually happened, but I can't guarantee. I don't have
will
the
verify
evidence of
for
it.
you. I will
But-
verify for you.
but-
My
but
aunts and uncles
I
will
would
certainly be able
never
to.
have put it past him to do something like that, right? So
Of
I was
course.
not there to witness it,
Yeah. There's
and I heard about it.
There's a moment where he comes down by the legislative grounds, and he goes down all of the stairs into the river valley backwards on his wheelchair.
Yeah,
But
that's right.
That's right. And he did it as a stunt in a sense to raise awareness, and he had the media out there. And then they said, of course, were you worried about falling or getting, injured? And he said, of course not. I'm not a madman. I came here late at night and did it by myself one time before, so he knew he could do it. But also, there's kind of one of the crazy ideas that you were out at night doing it by yourself with no observation.
And what if you did get hurt at
What
that
if you
point?
did get hurt?
Yeah.
Exactly at that point. And, there was a lot of talk, like, he was in the wheelchair again, balancing, as you mentioned, in these competitions, and he had a pair of track pants on and he took them off while balancing. And so just some crazy stunts. And I read a news article that said that so he was the reigning champ for a while about the wheelchair balancing competition. And he lost to somebody else, which he was so thankful for. And it was somebody who was newly paralyzed and was in a manual chair. And so at the time, that fellow was from Calgary. And he just said that, being that he's newly paralyzed and just getting used to the chair and whatnot, that he found some purpose even in the balancing competition and start to find some more of his people that could, sympathize with the situation. And of course, your father played such a huge part in DATS. Maybe if you want to touch base on that a little bit.
The DATS, yeah. And reflecting on what you just said too about just our sharing with your uncle and my dad being in wheelchairs. One thing that I think is really important to relate to is the fact that I grew up around people with disabilities, and I just saw them as my friends and my family. And I didn't see them as special or unique or people to be admired for the fact that they had a disability, or it just didn't factor into my DNA or my thinking. And so I really try to present that like here at the Banff Springs Hotel. Try to relate that fact that this is not something to be thought of as like a specialized kind of, like, people with disabilities aren't unique, special people
For sure.
that are inspirational.
We all know somebody.
We're just people, right? And so I sort of have that relaxed attitude about it, right? I can make jokes and they joke to me, and it's again just back to friends and family. And that allows me to be an architect and designer that again, can't design without that mentality in mind, right? That's really important. And unfortunately, a lot of designers never get to that point. They never get to that understanding or that appreciation of what
Yeah.
that all looks like.
Well, a lot of designers, both licensed interior designers, architects, they often talk about form and function. Yours truly is function. Like you're really focused on that. And in your book, if I'm not mistaken, was it 2020 that you released the book?
2020, the book came out.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
book came out.
Yeah.
So, Beyond the Ramp, I found to be a culmination of some of your life's work. As I'm going through, it's really a blueprint of lessons learned along your journey. Tell me about what it was like to document all of this and kind of bring it all into a digestible piece for other people to share.
This episode is supported by High Signs. I know not everybody likes commercials, but I do want to make a note that as the managing director of High Signs, we're here to help support architects and interior designers. And I've been fortunate to work on projects in Reykjavik, Iceland, Hawaii, Montana, Banff, Jasper, Calgary, Edmonton, and beyond. We like to focus on placemaking, wayfinding, and architectural signage. Our design team help with sign planning, content schedules, mapping, engineering, fabrication, and installation. Whether it's a public art installation or campus wayfinding, we're here to help. High Signs. Let's build something great together.
Yeah, you're right. It really is. It is a book on reflection. It's a book on my experiences, and it's stories about how I was involved in these projects, and the attempt was to the original intent of the book. It just took me a lot longer to finish than I thought or hoped for. But it was going to be a book that would be in schools of architecture, and it would be purposely not a technical checklist type style
It's
book.
got a lot
So
of illustrations and
it's
photos.
a lot of images,
Yeah.
but it's really the stories. It's like these are the people that I worked with.
Yeah.
And I grew to be very fond of the people I worked with, like any client that I would want to have. And
Yeah.
for most part, I carry on relationships with my clients, like far beyond
Yeah.
the end of the
Tell me
project.
about the publisher.
The publisher, Sarah Yates, she has a daughter with cerebral palsy.
Yeah, that's
So
what I
she
noticed.
herself has written books on accessibility. So it was kind of just it was something that just happened. I don't know exactly how I found her, but I did. And then once I did, it was like, wow, this was meant to be,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. That's what I felt
Yeah,
like. I
yeah.
did notice in the book as well, you mentioned this.
So
and-
she really did. So she was able to really help me in my writing to get that message across, right? So the book is the intent of the book is really to say, hey, this is the kind of clients that you can have, and the net result is that you can do great architecture and be a part of something where you see that you're making a meaningful difference
Definitely. And it can
to
still,
the
everything's
people that use it.
aesthetically beautiful as well.
Absolutely.
You've shown ways that, even ramps can be not just concealed in a sense, but be part of the building itself or the properties. And I think you don't necessarily explicitly mention it, but I know the location. I think it's the Venetian in Las
Yes.
Vegas.
Yeah.
And so, they've got this beautiful, I don't know what you call it, but the waterway that goes through the whole place. And I've visited this location before, but actually before reading the book, I didn't realize that it had accessibility points and that it was, able to be accessed as well. Maybe tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, yeah. I always say, my dad was actually he did like his gambling, and he liked going to Vegas. My mom was a huge Elvis fan, so
Oh, nice.
he was still alive, and they went to a couple of his shows. But more than anything, Vegas was really the most accessible city that we had ever been to.
Really?
Yeah.
Amazing.
And so once my dad got, to the airport and got a taxi to the hotel, he never had to worry about getting in a car again.
Really
So
nice.
he could wheel everywhere. And that's what made it so great for him is this feeling of independence and freedom. I would think, like he and I never really, talked about it in that sense.
Yeah.
But I could tell that, that meant a lot to him, right?
Yes.
Because again, growing up, it was always, as you alluded to earlier, a lot of times in the early days, people would say like, we'll just carry you up the stairs.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
of course you can do that,
You
but
definitely can,
you
but
have no idea what that feels like
you
to
feel
be
like you
carried up the
lost
stairs.
some
Yeah,
dignity in doing
exactly.
so.
Yeah. And so, he really enjoyed that freedom, because that's what sometimes a disability feels like, right? Is that it sucks away your freedom, right? So you want that independence, and so for him, Vegas represented that independence, right? And he could go and do a bit of gambling. He could go see Elvis or some other show. He could spend time with me, and we could all enjoy it, right? And then it got to the point where uh, um, we could go with like his grandchildren
Yeah,
and that sort of thing. And when I travel around cities, anywhere I am now in the world, I'm always looking at accessibility features,
course.
right? It's just
Yeah.
again, it's just the way I am. So my family has to kind of bear with me as we're in Paris last year, and there I'm like, it was just after the Olympics, so I'm like, I know there's going to be a lot of accessibility
of
stuff
course.
there,
Yeah.
so I'm
Was it
taking
nice to
pictures
see,
everywhere.
or were
It
you?
was, yeah, it was really good. My presentation yesterday, I had some slides and I talked about it. So lots of wayfinding, tactile wayfinding elements in the sidewalks and so on. So it would really help people who use canes and people with low vision in their wayfinding.
Yeah.
What we did find, frankly, was the elevators almost never worked in the public transit. So it was always my son-in-law that had to carry this big baby carriage, up and down the stairs. Luckily, the guy's super athletic and he had no
Oh
problem
yeah,
doing
okay,
it.
that
But
makes sense.
but that sort of shows some of the weaknesses in things. So we can design it, we can get it done, but then it's still got to be maintained and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff,
Tell
right?
me more about the importance of wayfinding signage, ADA, tactile, braille, those kind of things, and how it impacts the environment
Yeah,
around
they're
you.
they're so vital, right, in being able to get around. One of the things that this conference has really helped me also kind of get back to is my own design roots too. So it's very clear to me, and it's always been clear to me, and I kind of articulated that yesterday, is that I actually start my design process with wayfinding in mind. So,
Interesting.
so again, you sort of
Yeah.
mentioned function. Absolutely, function's a big part of things. So once I understand the program of the building I'm designing, let's say like a group home, uh, my starting point is always like, how do we get in? How do we get to the bedrooms? How do we get to the kitchen? Like, how is that all going to work? Like, what's our kind of circulation system going to look like?
Yeah.
And when I do it, it's with this thought that I'm in a wheelchair or I'm blind or I'm deaf. So I can't think any other way. So I'm just automatically doing it. And so I wouldn't put a stair somewhere, or I wouldn't
course.
put an obstacle in the way.
That's right.
And so that's how things get laid out, is this simple circulation system. And then the spaces that are accessed from this circulation system.
How have you watched signage from that perspective evolve over your career?
And so signage. Um, I think a lot of our systems have gotten better, but like, I know you're a signage company, but
Yes,
I remember talking to an architect who was a wayfinding specialist, and he said good wayfinding means very little signage,
that's
if
right.
any, right?
The least amount of signs is
Yeah,
the
so you
right
want to have the
amount.
least amount of signage.
Yeah.
I think, generally speaking, when it comes to something like signage, it's unfortunately a bit of an afterthought.
Sometimes,
It's usually
yes.
not in the architect's program. So the architect designs the building, and then the wayfinding is like somebody else is doing that, and they usually don't work together.
Yeah.
I was just mentioning to somebody, yesterday about bathrooms, and I go, it's always so funny. You go to these universal toilet rooms, and there's always these kind of handmade signs that say like, "Don't throw,
Yeah.
paper towel in the toilet." And I go, and maybe high signs could do this. Is like,
Yeah.
create this really great sign that is in every universal toilet room I
Yeah, you
see,
try to
and
make
just
it
make a nice sign
standardized.
out of it,
Yeah.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
could be a big business.
Yeah, it's true.
But yeah, there's all these like extra things that like information in that. But signage, I haven't worked with a lot of signage companies. We usually, in the projects I work on, we usually come up with our own.
Yeah.
But certainly, signage and accessibility are aligning much more today than it ever has,
I
right?
feel like we are trying to bridge that gap. And of course, this is about you. I didn't really want to get into too much of that aspect, but I think it plays a fundamental part of the work and the entire career that you've developed around accessibility. We try to plan a lot more around this. I was at a talk at the University of Alberta that was put on after hours, and David Gibson has a book called The Wayfinding Handbook. And I loved it. And then one aspect that he mentioned was around, and this isn't just about accessibility, but around signage and then some of the new products that we've become used to, which is, cell phones and GPS mapping like Google Maps or Apple Maps. And what comes from this is a lot less use of our brain because we're not using it to navigate. And he said, if you're going to take your next trip somewhere, try to do it without a device in your hand.
Right.
Try to rely on the signage. And as I was walking through here, as you've mentioned, as soon as you mentioned the washroom already in this facility was a little bit undersigned in itself because people were wondering where it is. And I walked in, it sparked, my imagination around your friend who's blind and walking into the urinals, for instance. And if you're trying to find your way through, there was really nothing in there that sort of will give you any cues of where you are. Such a challenge. So I appreciate you sharing that perspective. What tips would you say, we'll say like a kind of top 3 tips someone would think about in terms of working in accessibility first? What do you think about what you would give a brand new architect or a brand new interior designer? Where do they start with incorporating accessibility?
Well, it can be very specific to architecture, I guess, that question, or it can be a bit more kind of global. Um, the sort of high level view of your question, I would say the first thing you should do is try to volunteer for some groups that advocate for people with disabilities. That's certainly something that I grew up with. But then even when I graduated from architecture school, it was something I thought a lot about. So I actually volunteered. My wife would say I volunteered way too much, right? When I'm actually hiring people to do my work so that I can volunteer, maybe that's not the greatest business
Shows where
plan
your
in the
passion
world.
is, though.
But again, when you're working with these volunteer groups, you're part of a community, right? And it gives you that sense of community. Really, from a business point of view, you can make the argument that you're meeting people and your name gets out there, and they talk to other people. So you can make a business case for it, but really, it's more about investing time and learning about the
Are there any
issues.
groups in particular in Alberta that you would recommend?
Yeah, there's the Voices of Albertans with Disabilities is a group that tends to focus more on the overall diverse needs of people with disabilities. So they try to be something that isn't specific to one disability, but like all disabilities, right? And they've always been trying to be that kind of forum where all the different disability groups could kind of gather, right?
Yeah. I was going to ask one other question that sort of popped into my head about disabled, handicap, barrier-free. I know the terminology changed over time as well, like barrier-free has become more prominent. Tell me about the change in some of the terminology over time. Have you noticed it? And
Yeah, and that's a whole nother podcast
yeah,
in a way, but it was 1986 when an architect who used a wheelchair, Ron Mace, coined the phrase or term universal design, and that is used extensively in the United States. So they've always been a big influence on disability, the world of disability, with their Americans with Disabilities Act. Certainly in Canada they have.
Yeah.
Less so in Europe and other parts of the world. So universal design was this attempt to take the term barrier-free or accessible to another level where we would include everybody. So not just people with disabilities. The presentation that Mark and I did yesterday, we tried to make that argument that maybe we've gone too far, and in trying to solve the problem for everybody, we're maybe not solving the problem for anybody, but especially for people with disabilities, right? So ours was kind of an active call to say, hey, let's get back to understanding what it's like to be somebody with a disability. And so, again, you have to really appreciate that Ed Brennan and Percy Wickman, they both used manual wheelchairs, but they were different and they used it in different ways. Now, their friend that was in the power wheelchair was completely different,
Of course.
And so you can't have this kind of one size fits all sort of attitude about things.
Yeah.
But universal design allowed us to create this kind of checklist. So, well, if I do this, then everybody will be happy. Well, that's just not true, right?
Yeah.
And so I like the term, and that's why my book's called Accessible Architecture. I still like the term accessible because to me it relates to universal design, but it also brings us back to the fact that at the end of the day, we're really talking about people with disabilities,
Yeah.
first and foremost, and then everybody else benefits from
Yeah.
there.
I think that I should really put the plug and the emphasis on that, because you mentioned you'd hope that it would be in architecture school. So accessible architecture and beyond the ramp, of course. I don't know if you use that coined phrase off the cover, but I do hope that it makes its way in there more and further. And I think that, supplying a copy to myself is certainly something that I can appreciate and work into my aspect of how we serve the architecture industry. And I'm really happy and thankful that you sent me a copy. I'm going to ask one final question. I've asked a lot of people, what their favorite motto or catchphrase is, but maybe I'm going to ask something different this time and ask, is there one of your favorite books or something that you've, one author that's kind of spoke to you throughout your career? It doesn't have to necessarily be architecture either. It could be something else that maybe is drawn inspiration.
Well, oddly enough, the one that comes to my mind is not architectural. It's Animal Farm.
Oh,
George
Animal
Orwell.
Farm. Yeah, George
In
Orwell.
1984. I guess there's still that kind of politician in me in a sense, but also just a kind of an attitude towards society, right? And Animal Farm really struck me as something, a real reflection on society.
Yeah.
And how even the intent of trying to create a world that's better for all gets sabotaged by people that are selfish and mean and
Yeah.
want all of it for themselves.
Yeah, I
right?
remember Animal Farm as
And
well.
yeah, and it's, again, it's kind of like the world we live in today, right? And I guess the reason it resonates for me is because often that's what I see happening to people with disabilities is they get left out because of the ruthlessness of our world sometimes and our focus on the economy and making money and living this lifestyle. And if we need to include people with disabilities in that world, then we have to compromise. Like, there's a sense that we have to compromise our lifestyles to make sure others are taken care of. And that just doesn't sit well with me, right? Like, I want everybody to be in a good place and I'm going to do everything I can, right? So that's kind of why I think Animal Farm, they kind of, in its own way, it was making that statement, right? Maybe a bit more political, but I took that sort of societal attitude towards it.
Well, if it was an influence on what you've done in your career to date, we thank you very much for that, because you've made a tremendous impact on accessibility.
Well, thank you very
and
much.
your father as well. And I really want to thank you today for coming to speak on the podcast. And I hope you enjoy your time in the mountains and
I will.
and helping guide your friend around. So thank you again for joining us.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.